good afternoon, you guys. It's Michael here. Today we're going to be talking about some Prusa Slicer settings, getting some better 3D prints, particularly with PLA for right now. But from the last video, we kind of just talked about importing CAD models from an external source into Fusion 360. Today we're going to be talking about taking that model, slicing it, put it in Prusa Slicer, and then some of the print settings that I like to use just for initial print off, just for mock-up pieces. So this piece isn't going to need any kind of true structural integrity. It's not going to need 100% infill. It's not going to need a 50% infill. It's just going to need to be a very fast printed part. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to show you how this part printed out and what it looked like. As I stated in the last video, the reason why I like using this kind of idea or strategy is because when you're trying to design things, sometimes it's better just to get an actual real life in your hands example of especially some of these smaller components to kind of determine if they're really going to work or not. A lot of times it takes some experience, actually a fairly good amount of experience to kind of have an idea of what you're looking at if you don't really have it in your hands. So as I said in the last video, we're going to come up here to File, and we are going to Export. Once we click on Export, we can actually name it, apply what kind of file it is, and then a location. In our case, we're actually going to use a STL file. For Prusa Slicer, it seems, from my experience, it seems to work the best. A couple other things to keep in mind is before we go over to Prusa is keep in mind if you're designing this in millimeters or in inches, just to kind of get an idea to make sure that everything sounds right. And I'll kind of explain what I'm talking about over here. So now we're in Prusa Slicer, and of course it won't start in the actual slice. It'll start blank. So what you have to do is you have to come up here and you have to click on Add. Once you click on Add, you'll go through wherever you saved your export file to. You'll go ahead and click that and add it, and then it will be brought into your Prusa Slicer. Of course, other settings we may talk about in a different video, but for my case, I have a original Prusa Mini or a Mini Plus, so the actual build plate is going to say a Prusa Mini. From there, you can see we have some icons over here. These are really just move and rotate icons. Like if I click this, I can kind of rotate it around. I have a place on face, so if I want to place this on a particular face, I can do so. Of course, I have a back button up here, and some other things. I can cut a print at a particular location. When you select your print, so it might start off orange or whatever your actual filament color is, so we can actually come up here and change this to like a different color if we want to. But the first thing you're going to do, or you're going to want to do, is go ahead and select this. And over here, you kind of get an object manipulation tab. And it just kind of shows you where the position is at as far as X, Y, and Z. But I want you to keep in mind these scale factors and these sizes over here in inches. So after reading the spec page from the McMaster car component, we know that this is right around 2 inches tall. It's right around an inch, an inch wide. But we can also come back here. We go to Inspect, Measure, click on two edges here. We say 27.94 millimeters. So if you convert that to inches, it's a little bit above an inch, which sounds about right over here. But for this particular video, we're not going to worry too much about this right now, but just keep in mind you want to make sure that all this stuff matches up, especially if you're going to be printing it. If you're going to have to up the scale, you see it up by a couple percentage for some reason. If you up the scale, that's where you would do it. So you would actually come and say, 100.4, 100.5, maybe it's 101. You'll kind of mess around with those percentages to get the print size that you actually like. Also, if you're printing this in millimeters, go ahead and select in millimeters the actual size. So we know that the height changes a little bit. The X and Y will also change. Um, it actually seems like it's a little bit off. So we have 27 here. Um, yeah, so it seems like it's actually a little bit off, but that's fine for right now. There's some other things that we can do to change that. So going into our print settings, just to kind of get y'all started in Prusa Slicer, there's a couple things that I like to pay attention to. Um, the first one being the layer height, which would be up here, which is 0.2 millimeters, or you can go to 0.1 or 0.15. Of course, the filament is very important. The printer, and then of course the infill, the infill. So starting out, I usually like to just start at a 0.2 millimeter, and maybe like a quality or speed. If you're trying to just print really fast, I would just select the speed. If you're really trying to make some very strong, detailed prints, I would go ahead and select 0.15 millimeters. Um, and if you want to go maybe even more detail, I would probably stick around the zero point 0.1. But my recommendation starting out would be the zero point 0.2. It also, as you get more experience with 3D printing, a lot of it, will depend on your nozzle size, if it's 0.4 or 0.6, so on and so forth. But starting out, I will go ahead and select that to 0.2. Um, as far as the infill goes, typically, anything really over 30%, I haven't seen great amounts of strength added until you really start getting up around the 100%. But when you do the 100%, your time is really going to increase. So, for example, if we slice this down here, you see we get 57 minutes, and it gives you a cost and a filament usage. If I go up to 100% and go to slice, you see my time is almost increased double. So something to keep in mind. I typically try to stay around 20%. I think that's a nice solid number. 15% maybe if you're really trying to speed up. But also keep in mind that, between 57 and 55, there's really not a big difference. So I would also stick with, either 20 or 30 here. Um, the next thing we want to talk about is the supports. So if we go over to our CAD model here, we notice that there's kind of like some screws and some openings here um, that are going to be off the build plate. You see it's going to be off the build plate by, probably a couple millimeters, yeah, about 4 or 5 millimeters. It'll be off the build plate. And since this is a true 90-degree angle or very close to 90 degrees, it's going to be hard for the filament to stack up and build up. So we're going to have some sort of support there. Going back to our Prusa Slicer, the easiest way to do this, if we go over here, if we do so usually it starts at none, and if I try to slice this, you can see that it just randomly, right there, it'll just start building up, and it's not going to work very good. If I go to support on the build plate only, it's only going to look for any sort of gaps in the CAD model from the build plate. So, bam. And as you slice it, you can see it builds up. I use a scroller here on the right side. You see it builds up some support for us. And then we start building up and going through with our layers. Going back to our CAD model, if we were to select this and place it on a different face, you might want to just say do some support here. If we put for support and enforcers only, we can slice that, and you can see it's not really going to do much for us. If we do everywhere and slice, it'll actually give us supports everywhere the software thinks it needs supports. So this shaft being printed out is going to need some sort of support because, as you can imagine, the 3D nozzle is not going to be able to just lay this, and it's not going to stay. It's not going to stay there. It'll all fall down. So for them settings, for your kind of your basic, your simple settings, that's what I would focus on. The next thing I would focus on would be maybe some more strength related things. Just a couple of parameters here to kind of play and mess around with. The first one being the perimeters, so the number of perimeters that it actually builds around before it starts doing the fill. The higher you can get that number, the better. So if I go up to 4 here and go back to my slicer, see my time will jump up, but also around the perimeter I will have 1, 2, 3, 4 perimeters, and that's greatly going to strengthen your 3D prints. Sometimes I even print, maybe 6 or 7 perimeters, and it really strengthens, especially some some brackets and some other type 3D prints that you need for maybe more support or more like design related work. Next is the infill. This is the last thing that we will focus on because we have a fill pattern that we like to play around with. You can see here Prusa Slicer has has many different types of fill patterns. There's a couple here that I really like to use. So anything for speed, I like to use maybe grid or cubic. If I'm going really fast, I don't need any strength at all. I might go with rectilinear. And then if I'm going for strength, I really like to work, this honeycomb or this gyroid. So if we go to 3D honeycomb and we go back to our slice, you can see that the fill is kind of like this weird honeycomb. Now if we go back to here, you can see once we slice it, it actually changes, and that's one of the strongest ones that you can do. Keep in mind, it also increases the print time and increases the filament used and the actual cost. All right, well, I hope y'all learned something today about maybe Fusion 360 and some Prusa Slicer settings that will get you kind of started in the right direction for your 3D printing journey. Of course, I will have some more advanced videos, some tensile strength tests, some other things that I've kind of figured out with my 3D printing experience and my journey in 3D printing. So if you like the video, please, comment and subscribe and like. You have a good day. Thank you.